everyone, and welcome back to the Whale Nerds podcast. This is episode number 82. My name is Slater, and I'm here with Caitlin.
Hi, everyone, and we have a guest this week. We are here with Nick Pyenson, and Nick is a research geologist and curator of fossil marine mammals at the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History, but he's also the author of one of our all-time favorite books here on Whale Nerds podcast, Spying on Whales. And we talk about this book pretty often, especially early in the episodes of our show. So we're very, very excited to chat with you this evening. Nick, thanks so much for taking the time for us.
Oh my gosh, thank you for that's. I'm hugely flattered to hear that. That's just great. That
it's a little maybe obsessive how much we talk about your book, but we love
great.
it.
I'd love to hear more because I'm always curious, about. I think it's true for most people who do these kinds of write books. They just want to know what parts did you like, which from a standpoint of a fellow whale nerd, what. Not just what parts do you like, but there's a lot there. There's so much to talk about, like you said. So,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, Slater and I actually both listened to it as an audiobook, and I really enjoy that you narrated it, not that some random person narrated it. It was you telling your story, which was really fun.
Yeah, I'll tell you the thing that, I wanted to do that. That's kind of the motivating factor. Well, there's several, but I really wanted to share the stories about how we know anything about these animals, and especially about their origins, their evolutionary stories. And I think there's a lot of crazy parallels about how hard it is to know something about them today. And you guys know this from just your interactions, from what you've done, and how hard it is to know something about how they evolved from the fossil record. That just really struck me, and I also think that it's really valuable for people to know how scientists work and how science works. So I thought there was like a way to braid all that together and to tell fun stories, because science should be fun. It's hard sometimes; it's not always just joyride, but what it can tell you is something pretty amazing if you do it right. And there's a lot of serendipity. There's a lot of challenges. There's all kinds of unforeseen problems that happen when you try to do science, and some of them are ethical, some of them are logistical, some of them are diplomatic, some of them are just peer-to-peer, dealing with people. And I think that's kind of the big that's maybe the biggest picture I wanted people to know, is that scientists are people too. And they have a voice and they have their own experiences. My experiences are that of a white guy, and that comes with its own biases for sure. But I still wanted to share that, because I think there's a range of experiences I've had with a lot of different people that all fit together into one bigger narrative, and that's what became the book. But the answer about the audiobook is that when I realized all the special terms that I'd have to coach another narrator on how to pronounce, there's probably about 30, 40 scientific names and a few jargon terms. So, at that point I was just like, I should just do this myself.
Yeah.
And it was fun. It was hard work, and it was really rewarding, because I hadn't read a book as an audiobook before, and it made me appreciate the work that that voiceover actors and audiobook readers do. It's not easy. So.
Yeah, no, it's definitely super cool. Another book that we have Slater and I have both listened to was by Jason Colby. I think it's Orca. Is it of Orca?
How we came to know and love the.
Yeah.
How we came to know and love the ocean's greatest predator, or something like that. Sure. And he actually, I guess his publishing house didn't give him the option of narrating his own book, and he actually was kind of sad about it. So I was like, oh, it's kind of nice to hear from the author about because Jason's book is also some of his personal experiences, and so it would have been cool to have him narrate it. But yeah,
for sure. There's a real place for hearing from the person, his or herself or their selves, who wrote it, because then you're kind of hearing the words as they meant to be said, and shared, and that's intimate, and that's fun, and that's a whole added dimension. And I think you don't usually get that, when you read an audiobook and it's read by somebody famous. That's kind of fun, but it's also it's a step away from, unless an author really wanted to do that. Another book since we're plugging books, book I recently read was Rebecca Gigg's
Oh,
we
just got it too.
Yeah, I have. Yeah, so there's so much to love about this book, and it's
He's gonna review the book for us, and we're supposed to.
Oh no, I'm not gonna do.
No, we're supposed to review the book for the podcast, but I mean, we can give him a teaser.
No, I won't ruin anything. If you guys are gonna do this, I won't ruin. But what I will tell you is that I'm gonna do a book discussion with Rebecca in July for the Virginia Festival of the Book. So
cool.
We're gonna have a little conversation about kind of the topic we're talking about today.
Spoiler alert for our listeners. Hopefully we're gonna have Rebecca on the podcast as well, because they sent us the book and then they offered to chat with her. So she's in Australia, so we're gonna have to coordinate a lot of time zones, but we'll see what we can come up with.
And there's another book I'd recommend too, since we're doing just like the carousel. We can finish this soon. Bathsheba's
I haven't seen that one.
Floating Coast. So it's not just about whales, but there's nice big bowhead on the cover here. And this is all about Beringia, which is the region between Western Alaska and Eastern Russia that comprises the Bering Sea and the Chukchi Sea and all the animals and people that live around there. And it's kind of it's an environmental history. So it's a history of people and it's a history of place. And obviously there's a history of exploitation of marine mammals. So not just whales, but walruses too. There's just some great chapters, and they're really easy to digest. And they go into a deep dive of the history of what we know about how animals and people are braided together in different ways. So if you like history and you like history of place, this is probably the book to read about Alaska and Russia.
Cool.
I'll definitely check it out.
Floating Coast. Cool.
Do they have it on Audible, do you know, or is it audiobook as well?
I don't know. I don't. I should dig more on audiobooks, but I don't know. She's on Twitter, and she's another fantastic person. So
cool. Thanks for the recommendation. Yeah. So I guess maybe since we're already chatting a little bit about the book and how it came together and things, do we want to just start there?
Sure.
And then kind of maybe we'll backtrack a little bit and then kind of
how you got started.
Yeah. Okay. Do you want to ask the first questions later?
You can go ahead.
Okay. Well, I guess, what was your main inspiration about writing the book? It's a good way to show how science works and how scientists are people too, and all of that good stuff. That's one of the big things that I recommend the book to people, is like it's a approachable way to hear how a scientist works on things. And then also it's fabulous about whales.
Yeah, it's hard to go wrong whales are kind of a topic that begs explanation. And there's a lot of books. I've read a lot of books about whales, and not all of them really resonate with me, because I don't know, I guess I want more of a deeper explanation about how we know about something, or how somebody figured something out. I guess that makes me a demanding reader. Like, I'm not just satisfied, and also I kind of know too much about some of the facts, so I know when somebody didn't do their homework. So that, I guess that makes me kind of like the worst kind of reader for nonfiction books. But I guess the core inspiration is, I would say, is twofold, and I haven't really reflected on this in a while. The first one is that I thought back to the times when I was really most influenced by books that I had read, and kind of set me on the path that I chose for the career. and it does go back to, I think, being a high school student and reading some books that were really inspiring. And I can't I'm like trying to like remember some of those books. But what was, so the first point is that I wanted to write a book for kind of a younger version of me, a high school student or an early college student who may be interested in the topic, but is not necessarily an expert in science. And that was kind of the challenge that I wanted to undertake, was how to explain what I do to somebody who is curious enough and interested enough to listen, but maybe doesn't have the background and doesn't really actually have the interest in science. So you have to kind of like share with them why you want to know and why you want to figure it out using the tools of science. The second inspiration comes from the science books. This gets at like the books I remember, and I actually read this book when I was in just a bit after college, Robert Sapolsky's Primates Memoir. Not at all about whales, and not really actually that much about the topic in the title, primates. There's a lot about studying primates, but it's more about how scientists think and how scientists do their work. This is actually a story about his own career as a scientist, but it is so well written. Many chapters are different from each other, and it's really well structured and paced. It's now about a 20-year-old book, 25-year-old book, but it's some great writing. It's some great science writing. Another book that really inspired me was Neil Shubin's Your Inner Fish, which is a paleontologist writing a book about the deep evolutionary origins of different parts of our body, whether it's bones or organs or anatomical systems. These all tie back in evolution, and being a paleontologist makes you really aware of the origins of these parts. And that's really a challenging topic to undertake, but it's told through the stories of science and these stories of people and places and how we do things. So those kinds of books structured a lot of the way how I thought I wanted to write something about my own experiences, and I did want to highlight the people who I worked with too. So a lot of parts of the book I'd been writing in my head for some time. And I would like take out my phone on on my metro rides to work and just kind of peck out a few paragraphs where I'd try to remember how things happened or who said what or funny stories. And what I'd say is like the way how that I went from that to a book was writing, just a lot of writing. A lot of it was not very good, and editing. So you write a lot and edit a lot. And after doing that for a long time, and doing it under the gun, book happened. So
Cool. Oh, that's awesome. Well, do we want to ask more questions going about the book? I guess we could ask about let's ask about, so I have a question about, this is more like an ethics thing, I think.
Oh, sure.
Really, but I was thinking about this when you were talking about Sarah Baena especially. And how there's so much you try to visualize for people with the words describing the site, how much unsampled material there is there. And so like as a paleontologist, like where do you draw the line between like the environmental and cultural impacts of a dig versus like the data you're going to be able to collect? Like how much is it worth knowing the thing when you have such an impact on the place? I mean, it was pretty serendipitous that the road cut was already happening, right? And that exposed all those things for the highway. But if you were to go back there, like, I mean, how much more do you dig up, I guess is the question. Like what's reasonable?
Yeah, I think there's two tensions there. One, and I definitely, I feel this acutely, which is that, anybody who collects natural history objects, and this is not just about fossils, it's about anything. You're losing information all the time, whether it's a carcass stranded on a beach or a skeleton that's falling out of a cliff face. You're not going to get everything that there once was. That's just not possible. Even a fresh carcass, that had died immediately. It's not possible. You're going to lose information along the way. And if you think that what you're trying to collect is important, man, you have this like deep desire to collect everything. So you need to accept, I mean, that's like kind of almost like a Zen thing of like, accept that you will not collect everything about that object, but you'll do your best job. And that's kind of why museums exist, right? Are these places where you can store that information. Ideally, the object itself, but more importantly is the context of the information. And, you know, I think about that with Cerro Baena. I brought like a little 3D print of one of the
Oh,
layers.
cool.
Oh, awesome.
You know, and you can print one of these up yourselves when you download, but that shows up pretty well in that angle.
Wow. Is that B33?
It is B33. Yeah, good call.
I was just
So-
listening to that the other day.
Yeah. So, you know, and actually, like, you can even see there's a paintbrush printed it really, really tiny
Oh, that's funny.
over there. But so, I mean, this is data that never left the country, right? Like the actual object didn't leave the country, but we have the
Yeah.
digital data. And it looks great. I mean, when you look at it online, it's like being with the photogrammetry data, all the photos assembled together in a 3D model, it looks like you were right there. And so that's all information, right? That's not the actual object. And so that it's a good segue to the second item, which is like, yeah, there's the tension about wanting to collect everything, but then there's the actual real world consideration that I am an American citizen working in Chile with Chilean and other South American collaborators. It's not my patrimony. It's not my job to tell them what to do.
Right.
I think my job is to do the science. And so I want to do that in a way that's fair and ethical and responsible, you know, ethical with permits, fair in terms of international collaboration, where everybody feels like they have a fair piece of contribution and that you're working together towards something. And, you know, this is nearly like 10 years ago. This is all before we started talking about diversity, equity, inclusion in science. And it's clear that the way how science works is not fair to everybody. It's very biased against women and people of color. And it's been biased in favor of people who look like me. And so I didn't realize it at the time, but now I think about this a lot more, that a lot of the international collaborations I do are actually a form of science diplomacy. And diplomacy is actually a person-to-person relationship. And by having, you know, I'm really proud that a lot of the relationships, the collaborations, but the one person-to-person relationships, co-author to co-author, collaborator to collaborator, scientist to scientist, that have formed not just in Chile, but all around the world, have persisted. And that goes back to having a form of trust and communication and understanding. And it doesn't always happen that way. There's way too many examples of science going in a different direction towards like colonial approaches or parachute science, where the resources, so the objects, the discoveries, and the knowledge are extracted. It's very asymmetric, right? So I like to, you know, there was a National Geographic held an Explorers Festival last week, actually. And one of the things we talked about was about parachute science and colonial science. But how, you know, the key thing there, like with respect to Cerro Baena, is that it was a good example of global North meets global South. Someone like me representing the global North coming down with a lot of advantages for doing science, but I wanted to collaborate. I wanted to work. I wanted to solve this problem. And the ability to answer those questions is about working with your colleagues and having trust. And that, you know, that's something I tried to write about over the course of a few chapters in Spying on Whales, was how does that work? And it's not necessarily a story about global North meets global South. It's people to people, and people are different and weird and funny in different ways and quirky and have personalities. And that's fun and colorful. And I wanted to kind of illustrate that. But if you're able to navigate that, that can be what makes science fun, makes it successful. It makes you feel like you actually can answer the questions that you sought to answer. So unwittingly, you know, without thinking about diversity and equity and inclusion, I kind of was heading in that direction. And it's really the question I've been asking myself is, what was I thinking beforehand? You know, how was I doing science, and how do I do it differently now? And I think I'm just a little more aware that there are these biases, and I really value the peer-to-peer exchange, which should be reciprocal. Everybody should win off the success in kind of a virtuous cycle. And it's hard to do that. It doesn't always work that way. But the opposite of that is extractive, where there's a huge asymmetry, and that has gone for many years in the opposite direction, where the global North has generated big museum collections from things that do belong to other countries. So, going back to Sarabayana, those data, the actual objects stayed in country, and the data are available for anybody. I think one of the things I wrote was like the day we published on our discoveries, those data were available to anybody, a kid in Kansas and a kid in the Atacama, as long as they had an internet connection, could see the results. And I think that's a good way to do it. That's kind of the best I could do at the time. And I think that's going to be more of, hopefully, of what you see in the future for this kind of work. And that's not just for paleontologists. You can think about examples where that could be true for somebody who's doing whale research on living whales, because those are resources. They're resources, in a very strict sense for the United States. They're protected species, but this, they have economic value and they have scientific value. So, and we don't know everything that there is to know about them. I was kind of, thinking about having this conversation tonight. I was trying to think, well, what are the new things that I would say if I got a chance to rewrite this? How much more do we know than when this book was published? I was kind of hoping you guys are going to ask me that question.
I mean, if you want to go ahead and go that route with it, we can. I feel
I don't want
like
to
we
preempt
know more things, but we also have more questions.
Yeah, if you guys, we can talk about that, or
well, I do have a follow-up in particular about Sarabayana. So after you went to the site and after you wrote that section for the book, there was a discovery of a massive die-off of whales.
Right,
in the same area, if I'm not mistaken, right?
A bit farther south in a place called Golfo de Peñas, which is in Patagonia, Chilean Patagonia.
And so it sounded like, again, a harmful algal bloom was the cause, sorta.
I think so. It's pretty, it's one of these things, if you've ever had done a necropsy on a whale, dolphin or whale, you realize it's super hard to figure out the cause of death in some instances. I think I had actually Jeremy Goldbogen, who's a professor at Stanford, who shows up in the book. He texted me some photos of a fin whale carcass stranded
at Asilomar.
Yeah.
So Slater lives in Monterey.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So that fin whale was clearly T-boned by some ship. I mean, it was a fresh carcass. The lumbar verts were all splayed open. That's really traumatic way to go. But that in that case, the cause of death is pretty clear, I think. But when you get a fresh carcass and you think it's harmful algal bloom, you really got to get the gut contents, and then you have to do you have to do the assays, and it's not always clear. So it turns out, I think it's really hard to show harmful algal blooms, and that was the challenge in this part of Chile. It was like you have all these carcasses, some of which have been decaying for quite some time. They all look like sei whale, but the question is, they don't all seem to have arrived at the same time. There's kind of they probably came over the series of weeks or months. And boy, does that sounds exactly like what we think was going on with Sarabayana, where you have four levels of this. And for an assemblage of La Familia, where you have three whales piled on top of each other, I think those three whales probably knew each other. Were they related? Did they live together? It's hard to know, but I suspect, those three whales.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
I think, are they truly a family? Probably not, but they might have been genetically related to each other. They might have swam together. So, one of the things I think, one, cause of death is always tricky. But the prediction that we had out of the work at Sarabayana was that, large whale populations are recovering. And as they recover, we probably expect to see more large whale strandings. And that, happened. And it was actually some of our collaborators from the work in Sarabayana who went down to Chile and Patagonia to do that taphonomic work, to measure as many carcasses as they could, get aerial photos. They had National Geographic funding. And it does look like that was harmful algal bloom. And it's for a population of whales we don't really know much about. Sei whales are kind of, poorly known all around the world. We think they're temperate tropical. We don't really know. We think there's one species. We don't know.
We've seen them in the spring off the coast of Massachusetts. So like, how temperate tropical are they really? The water's like high 40s in the spring when they're here.
Right. And, they're showing up at, what's the latitude at that part of Chile? It's in the 40s.
Yeah, I mean,
so,
we're like 42 here,
yeah.
so.
So, there's all these kinds of questions that come out of that, but I do think that it's a sign that large whale populations at least are recovering, and we're about to see what the world was once like before we systematically reduced whale populations 90-95%. We're living in a world that's fundamentally changed from how it was even 100 years ago. And those are the kind of really interesting ecological questions to me, is what was the world like before we took down all the whales? And we 2 to 3 million whales. That amount of biomass is gone from the oceans. And
Yeah.
you're crazy to think that didn't somehow have an effect on marine ecosystems. So, the more we can have whale populations come back, I think the more we'll see these patterns and realize how the world once was. And that's just going back to Cerro Baena. That's kind of what I think is really valuable, is that Cerro Baena is what is before whaling for sure. So,
Yeah.
it should not be so surprising that you're finding a lot of whales together, because there were no humans to hunt them. So it's showing you how dense and how abundant whales once were, that they would pile on top of each other from the stranding.
And become fossilized together.
Yeah. I mean, that's,
Yeah.
I really didn't, I was reluctant to think that it was strandings. I wanted there to be another explanation. And, the more the data piled together, I was like, really, one place, 4 different times? Really, all these whales together? This is kind of like, and that's the value of doing science, is that at least you can like ground truth what you think with evidence and data, and your colleagues to check you for your worst assumptions and biases. So
Yeah. That's why it's good to work in a team.
yeah, I think no one person can do it all. And it's really like a strong antidote to the hero complex, that, oh, it's just one person who's in charge and figures it all out. And I don't know everything. And what I really enjoy is learning through other people. So one of the real pleasures of doing science is getting to do science with other people, because they have different experiences, they have different backgrounds, different expertise. And that is hugely valuable, because I think, as I wrote in the book, the best questions in science are at the edges of disciplines. Disciplines that we have are really actually artifacts. Like paleontology doesn't actually exist out in the world. Fossils do, but the idea of paleontology doesn't. But our questions are good questions. And sometimes those questions cut at the edges of fields. And so that's when, a conversation that I have with Jeremy Goldbogen, somebody who thinks really differently from the way I do, and has a different skill set and expertise, we get along with each other, but the questions, our kind of conversations, always get at these questions on the edges of our expertise, because I want to know more about what he's doing. He wants to know more about what I'm doing. And from that margin, that's where these questions kind of sit.
Yeah.
Speaking
so
of,
go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. We got the same thing. Speaking of Jeremy and your guys' collaboration together, you were on a Icelandic whaling ship.
Yeah.
Cutting into whales.
Yeah.
You talk about the sensory organ in the fin whale's jaw.
Yeah.
What was that like?
That was wild. I mean, that was another crazy. So that was part of my postdoc work, and I was really fortunate to be able, one, to time the time and or to schedule the time and the place for doing that work with Jeremy as he was finishing his PhD research. And we this opportunity to go to Iceland was really a function of having an ideal connection through his advisor and my postdoc mentor, Bob Shadwick, who had worked in Iceland in the 80s with a team from Duke University to look at the mechanical properties of the arteries and hearts of large whales that were, just like as they had been recently, part of the whaling industry in Iceland. And what makes whaling in Iceland different from whaling elsewhere is that it's commercial whaling. It's not scientific whaling, and it's very tightly regulated by the Icelandic government. Whatever your feelings are about whales being killed, it at least is really transparent about why they're doing it. and
Mhm.
it's all within their economic political jurisdiction. So that again is another like example of science diplomacy. We're like, okay, this is going on in this country, and these data are otherwise lost. This incredible anatomical information, going back to stranded whales. Man, is it just a mess when you come upon a large stranded whale? And the thing I didn't realize, and actually this goes back to photos that Jeremy was even sending me from the Isalamar fin whale. There were chunks of throat muscle and parts of the skin that were kind of littered on the shoreline. And Jeremy sent me this amazing photo of a piece of the tongue, and it looked exactly like, I'm just gonna like pull it up on my phone here. This is just like, I don't know if you can really see.
I have so many friends that have been
Oh, wow.
have gone down, that live in the area, that have
I mean,
gone down to see that whale.
It
Yeah.
looks, yeah, here, I want to get in the
Yeah,
room,
we can
but
see it. Oh yeah, that's good.
So
it's,
did he
I mean,
did he take from the whale to do research?
do not know. I know he has a permit for
Okay.
doing so, but I think he was just kind of scoping it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He would rather put a heart rate monitor on a living whale. That's kind of his
Yeah.
jam. But also if it's not, if it's a quick drive away, he's going to go check it out. So,
Yeah.
but it's this photo where I'm like, I can see the collagen fibers, I can see the muscle bundles. This reminds me of what we saw in Iceland. It's also a beautiful photo. It reminded me of the reasons why we went to Iceland, which was to know something about the anatomy, because otherwise we don't really know that much about these large whales, about how their bodies are put together, how they're able to use all these parts of their anatomy to lunge feed. And that's what Jeremy and I were really getting at, was like, how does lunge feeding work and how did it evolve? Well, to know that, you need to know something about the parts that are involved, and the anatomy is all different. Lunge feeding whales are just built completely differently from other whales. And this was at a time before even all the drone data were available. So we just, I didn't know anything. Every photo I saw, I was like, is that what we're looking at? Can you see the floor of the mouth? Can you see a bit of this?
Yeah.
And so getting to see it in person fresh, there was very little decay with these carcasses. That was a huge, huge boon. We collected so much data. I could sit around for the next 5 years and just publish on data that we collected from Iceland.
Wow.
So there's that huge benefit, that big plus of like a lot of information we can get.
Yeah.
That would otherwise be lost. We're doing it in a legally clear way. The question is like, should you be working with whalers? And I wrestled with this question a bit because I think there's rightfully so, a lot of controversy about whether we should be whaling. Fin whales, no large whale population except for maybe humpbacks has really recovered from whaling. So like, yeah, maybe we shouldn't be whaling any of them. But Iceland does regulate it. They do have a quota. So I felt a little bit more comfortable in that there were some rules that were being followed for commercial whaling, and that ultimately the purpose was for consumption. So this to me seemed a bit more like what you would, the kind of interactions scientists have had with indigenous peoples of the Arctic, the Inupiat in the North Slope borough of Alaska, or in Greenland, and different from scientific whaling in Japan. And I have Japanese colleagues who can barely get access to data from the Japanese scientific whaling work, which is really different because scientific whaling is agenda-driven science. It's science saying like, we need to kill whales because we think they're doing this. And the problem is that you can answer those questions by doing non-lethal research. You can actually get better data than by harpooning these whales. So when you're faced with that, you have to say like, man, I think this doesn't pass the test, the ethical test. But for commercial whaling, that's a bit different. And I'm happy now that we collected the data when we did, because it doesn't look like Iceland has not been commercially whaling for a few summers. And the opportunities were so slim. We had a few hours to work every day, and we'd get whatever information we could. And really, I mean, every time I looked more and more at the anatomy, the more I realized we didn't know anything about the vasculature, the nervous system, just how all this is put together. It's still largely unreported, unknown. And that's exciting. That's why you kind of do science, is to pull back at mysteries.
Do you want to ask him, Slater?
The next one.
No, like
Yeah.
when you held that thing,
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
the organ in your
I didn't
hand.
even.
Yeah. Oh,
that
I
was
thought you. I thought,
well. That was just wild. I mean, I
Like, what did it feel like? Was it squishy? Like, was it
Oh yeah,
hard? Like,
it's gooey. It's gooey, sticky gooey for sure. It's
how big is it? Like, is it like you need two hands or?
In a fin whale, it's more larger than two hands put together, and it's got about that oval-like structure.
Okay.
But there's all these papillae. I'm trying to show that with my tips of my fingers here. There's all these papillae that kind of like come out of either side, and you're just like, this is gooey. It has these weird polyps on the inside. I mean, it literally looks like sci-fi alien kind of freakiness. And I was just like, I had all the literature with me, and so I had a binder of PDFs that were printed and covered in like in acetate pages. So I was just like flipping through these pages, and I was standing there with Jeremy and Bob, and I was like, this doesn't make any. This is not. Nobody has reported this, and this is really weird because we've killed 2 million whales.
Yeah.
Was nobody looking at this? And I think the answer is yeah. I think like the times when you had a biologist who knew anatomy on board a whaling ship were actually not that many times. So somebody who would think to look at something or have the opportunity probably didn't. So that set us off on this kind of like, is this a pathology or is this real? Let's start opening up every jaw we can. And that's not exactly easy because you need like 9 giant Icelanders with hooks and flensing knives to take a break from their very important job to come over and help, goofy scientist who's like, can you just cut this thing you never cut and cut it in half just in this perfect way that we want you to, and then stop and we want to take these photos and don't get mad at us. So it was, that's the diplomacy aspect of like, how do I ask these people to help me without pissing them off?
Yeah.
We were able to do that. And that was great because we realized it wasn't a pathology. 2, that it was asymmetric. It was actually not wired the same way every time we looked at it. And by going on one of the whaling ships and collecting from minke whales, we were able to show that it wasn't just one species. When you find 2, you're like, okay, this looks like something that actually is probably pretty prevalent across lunge feeding whales. And that's when you pick up start sending emails to your colleagues saying like, can you get me a chin or can you pop one of these open at the next
If you
training?
find a fresh one.
Yeah.
And so does it have to be fresh?
Well, it has to be fresh if you want to do histology on the nervous tissue. And that's, to be honest, that's what makes it a Nature paper and not just like something else, is being able to get fresh tissue to do the histology is definitive for showing nerves. Nerves decay really fast upon death. So if you want to get nervous tissue, you need to get something freshly dead. And how are you going to do that with whales? You either have to be really lucky or working with whalers. So, so that's kind of the, there's histological data, there's anatomical data, there's across many different species, across young animals, across old animals. So, you kind of think every which way about how to pull at to tease out the answer here. And the answer is, I think lunge feeding whales have this gnarly bit of nervous tissue that has vasculature that's asymmetrical. And that was the other thing, like, asymmetrical. Well, fin whales are pretty asymmetric in their pigmentation. Actually, they're the only asymmetrically pigmented mammal on the planet.
Yeah.
So, and if you looked at their baleen is asymmetrically pigmented too. Pretty crazy, right? So, I mean, it's just like that always makes me think every time you look at a whale, there's something else that's just not normal about them, like any other mammal. And you just kind of wonder what is going on with evolution in the ocean that leads to these kinds of, I mean, it's exciting as a scientist to realize like there's so much we still haven't answered about them. So
totally.
Yeah, it was wild. The chin organ thing was super, super wild. And I had been doing that work when I went down to Chile, and I was looking literally at B33, and I remember walking up to the tip and thinking, wonder if they had a sensory organ too. Let's see what, I'm trying to think of the years that it was. I think there were a few seasons when my work in Iceland then overlapped with Chile. That was kind of crazy.
Oh wow.
Globetrotting, carbon footprint, but
burning up dead dinosaurs to go look at other dinosaurs.
Yeah, I do. I mean, they do. I mean, if you've ever been close to a whale, it's hard not to think of what, what it's easy to imagine how people mythologize them as beasts and dragons, because they just don't look like everything else that you encounter on a daily basis. So
Yeah,
even,
totally.
even if your life is that of, fishing or whatever,
Yeah,
being on the coast, being that close to a whale is just a very different experience. So
totally. Okay, I think we have one more like bigger like type question, and then we'll maybe ask you a couple little fun ones to wrap it up. But I'm just wondering, like, where do you see your work having the most impact and relevance on modern day whales? Like if it's the work in Iceland, or if it is things like Therabaiana, like I guess, where do you feel like you're having the most impact on understanding our whales that we have in the ocean today?
So working with Jeremy, actually, and a postdoctoral fellow who's working in Jeremy's lab named Matt Savoca, we're trying to ask that specific question about what happened in the last 100 years, from a world where there were 2 to 3 million more whales versus what we have today, which is recovery. And how much of these really important nutrient and chemical cycles that drive productivity in the oceans are we missing today that we had circa 1900, before pelagic industrial whaling reduced the numbers of the largest whale species 90 to 95%. And it turns out that there's a big missing part here. And it's kind of hinted at by some of the back of the envelope calculations that you may have seen reported by economists. But the key thing here is feeding rates. And the only way you get at feeding rates is from the tag data, right? So tag data are great for knowing about like what's happening on that day and how much a whale is feeding and how. But if you have enough tags over enough years, over enough different species, you can actually say something about the big picture, which is what you're asking. It turns out, it's not hard to imagine that missing a component to ocean ecosystems. It turns out it's really, really important for these cycles, for the amount of carbon, for the amount of nitrogen. It's not just about the whale pump that you've probably read about and may even talk about on these whale watches, that whales keep these nutrients up at the surface that would otherwise fall down and fall all the way down the water column to the seafloor. But if we were able to actually bring back the abundances of whales to what they were circa 1900, you would recover a huge missing component of the amount of ocean ecosystem function that's missing right now. So that's a big picture thing that I think is really relevant. And I do think what we're going to see is, what of the whale species are going to be most adaptable and which ones are going to need our help. The ones that need our help are species that are limited to rivers. So the Yangtze River dolphin, too late. I think that one's gone. But the Ganges river dolphins, there seems to be more than one species. It's pretty clear, and those are imperiled by where they live. So they're probably going to need a lot more assistance from us. But other species like humpbacks and gray whales, they seem to do pretty well. I mean, there's this report of a gray whale hanging off Monaco in the Mediterranean. That's the third time this has happened. And some scientists just published on the Namibian gray whale that was the farthest extraliminal record from a few years ago. That's tough. I mean, I think at a certain point you have to admit that gray whales are somehow navigating pretty far from the North Pacific, and they're not emaciated. They're kind of doing just fine. And we know from the very recent record, actually, this is something I've just been working on with a former postdoctoral fellow and now a professor at University of Wisconsin, Allison Fleming, that we think we've identified a gray whale skeleton from North Carolina that's
cool,
1,000 years old. And so this is clearly an Atlantic gray whale. It seems to be the most complete skeleton we know.
Wow.
And we hope to say more about it later this year. But you realize that gray whales once were in the Atlantic not that long ago, a few hundred years ago. And why they disappeared, nobody knows. But they're survivors. They made it through several ice ages, And I think, this is part of the big question is which whales are going to thrive and which ones are really going to be more like the vaquita or more like the North Pacific right whale, where we may not see them go extinct. I mean, I thought while I was writing the book that vaquita was on its way out, and it was almost, it was kind of the typical conservation fare of writing an obituary. But I was wrong. I was totally wrong. Vaquita have not gone extinct. They're not doing great, but
Yeah.
you can't
They're
say
hanging
that.
on.
Yeah, they're still in there.
Yeah.
So, and that's, if
Few
you
left.
all the data that we have, I mean, data that we have from other mammal species says that there are really bad days, huge genetic bottlenecks. We had one. We know many other species have gone through that. So it's kind of, it's a bit too soon to weigh in on vaquita. And that actually should be a hugely hopeful thing, is that the species we thought that was in the most peril has not gone extinct yet. So, we should be a little bit more optimistic about these species that are tough to know about, that are tough to document and observe, hanging in there.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you have a favorite fossil that you have found as part of your work?
This is great. I always love this question. It's fun. I try to communicate this in the book, is that I think a lot of paleontologists are like this, and a lot of people work in museums, that you remember the specimens you've handled and touched. There's something about that, like tangible quality of knowing the weight and the texture and how it feels. And you soak up a lot of that information, and you kind of remember in your head where you last put that specimen in the drawer. And there's a lot of specimens like that I think about, that some of which I haven't published on. So I'd say like those are frustrations that kind of loom and hang in my head of like, man, I really gotta publish on that one specimen I collected a long time ago that's in another museum's drawer. If I had a favorite, it's like picking your favorite kid, really hard thing to do. I always stumble on this question. This is like the thing I should like really nail. I would say it's, I don't have one. I'm always excited to find the next one and that's part of like this enduring process, is that you're never quite done until you're dead. I think that when you're a collector and when you're a museum type, it's something that you're always going to be doing. That's a motivating aspect, I think, of the line of work that I do, that you constantly are on the lookout for something interesting. I mean, this is a marine mammal, but not a whale. Finding the cast of an elephant seal in the collections that was collected in Indiana off
I just saw
the
that
Lafayette River. Yeah.
Like a news story just came out about it or something. I just saw that today.
That's funny.
Maybe I was looking at your website or something. I don't know what I was doing.
It's still a recent news item on my lab webpage that we need to update. But yeah, that's like the last place on Earth I'd expect to find a marine mammal. But based on all the data, that seems to be true. What a little lost seal that swam upriver about 1,000 years ago. So you just never know what you're going to find and what kind of questions those objects are going to force you to confront. So I guess that's why I'm kind of looking forward to it. I'm really excited about this gray whale that we identified in North Carolina that was collected about 30 years ago. That's kind of a cool story to me.
We just did a pretty big episode about gray whales, and we talked about records of them being seen in the southeast US, and then a few records from the Mediterranean and other parts of the North Atlantic. And so that'll be cool. We'll be excited to see that come out.
There'll be a whole episode on it.
Probably it will be a big part of an episode
awesome.
on it.
I mean, we generally tend to find, I know this because the Smithsonian has most of the gray whale fossils from the US Atlantic seaboard, or subfossils, historical gray whale specimens. And they're mostly individual elements, bits of skull, jawbone, cervical vert, which is pretty diagnostic for gray whales. And I've seen a lot of the European stuff. It's a little more complete, but it's still not as complete as this skeleton in North Carolina. So,
oh, cool. That's exciting.
As as we lose the coast to sea level rise, I think we'll probably have a narrow window for collecting a few more.
Yeah.
Might be buried in different, barrier islands and berms. So, that's actually, I guess, the bigger picture is that there's a lot more marine mammals to find as glaciers melt and sea level rises. There should be some pretty exciting discoveries. I mean, we're going to find more ice age mammals melting out of the permafrost and out of glaciers. So pretty soon we'll start finding some weird marine mammals that once were, and on my bucket list is, on top of finding a Neanderthal would be stellar sea cow, would probably be, there's all kinds of Pleistocene relics that may have entered into glacial deposits. So
I guess
climate-
that'll be the one silver lining of glacial melt.
I was just going to say, climate change is such a looming problem, but there's a lot more, this is the whole perspective of working in museums, is that you want to save the world. You want to save parts of the world before you can't know about them anymore.
Yeah.
So I really take that to heart, that my job is to collect and preserve as much as I can, to do it responsibly, to do it in a way that recognizes the sovereignty and the rights of nations and peoples, but it should also be fun, and you should be able also to answer scientific questions. I think that's pretty important too.
Awesome.
All right. I have one more question. On the podcast, I talk about, because I'm a photographer, so I always talk about, after reading your book, especially about wanting to go back to the Eocene and photograph the animals then. Is there a period of time you would want to go back to?
Absolutely. A period of time and place. It would be Pakistan, probably 55 million years ago. I would want to see the traces left in, I guess it would probably be it's in the Eocene, between 35, 50 million years ago. But I'd love to see the kind of footprints left in the sand of these earliest whales. I'd like to see
Pakicetus.
Yeah, Pakicetus probably looked, these reconstructions of it as a little lost dog are pretty funny. But the protocetids, these kinds of whales that are looking a little bit like crocs, a little bit like sea lions, they probably left some pretty interesting traces and records of their behavior that we don't always get fossilized. And I just think it'd be really, did they have hair? Did they have tail flukes? What was really going on? Were their toes webbed? I mean, there's just a lot of soft tissue that we would like to know more about. What was the color of their skin or their fur? Paleontologists have so much fun doing these paleo art reconstructions. And I actually think they're not imaginative enough, because just look at the diversity of whales today. I mean, there's some really weird dorsal fins. There's some really weird flukes. There's just a lot that would never, ever be preserved. And I always think about, we're just talking about gray whales. Imagine if you did not know gray whales existed and you found them in the fossil record. There would be no ability to know anything about their bizarre feeding behavior or their ecology. So, I mean, maybe you could figure some of it out if you're really lucky, but
you wouldn't know how many hitchhikers they have. And
no, I mean,
they just look crusty.
Exactly. I mean, there's so many neat things about their ecology that are just never preserved. And that's, we get pretty far if you find barnacles in the fossil record that are very specific to those parasites on specific species of whales. You kind of know the presence of a whale, right? But that doesn't always happen. And you actually don't, that's just an inference. It may have been different in the geologic past. So I think that's always what makes it fun is I have a colleague who talked about being a paleontologist in this way. And he said that it's almost like being a biologist on a different planet, but it's the same planet, just at different times. So if you can imagine, this is to your question, Slater, if you can imagine what life would be like on the Eocene, it would be almost as if you'd come to a different planet. But it's actually planet Earth. It's our home, just in a different configuration, different continents, different places, different temperatures, different CO2 concentration. And then you have some lineages that aren't around now, but they did begat, they're part of the family tree. So you kind of, it would be cool to pop into, sorry, I had my email open, gotta change this.
You're good.
So it would be really cool to drop in on different times in the geologic past to see what whales were like. Yeah, I definitely, that is part of my, like, I do dream of that kind of stuff. So.
Cool, it's not just us.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Well,
Eocene
the
Beach
book
Party
painted a good picture.
Yeah, for
The
sure.
book painted a good
Thank you.
picture of it, for
Glad to
sure.
hear that. I'm glad to hear that you guys get so much out of it. That's really hugely awesome to hear, because I did pack a lot of stories in there, and yeah, I'm really glad that it's found its home with you guys.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I feel like we could probably carry this conversation on all night, but you and I being on the East Coast, I think we should probably wrap it up. But thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. We were so excited when you agreed to chat with us. We were like, oh my gosh, we really love this book and we get to talk to him. We were like, so yeah, we were very excited. So but to wrap up the episode, I just want to also say thank you to everybody that listens to the Whale Nerds podcast. You can check out our new website, thewhalenerds.com, or you can follow us on social media on Instagram or Facebook at Whale Nerds. And thank you to our Patreon subscribers. We always appreciate your support of our work. And I think that's it, pretty much. Do you want to do Secret Whale of the Week, Slater?
Do you have, first, do you have a website or anywhere they can get more information about you?
You as well, Nick.
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, I would go, there's a lot of ways to find out more information about the work I do. If you want to download those 3D models of fossil whales from Cerro Baena, you can go to 3d.si.edu and just search Cerro Baena or fossil whale, and you'll find plenty of great 3D models that you can even print at home, just like this. And you can definitely
awesome.
You can definitely manipulate and measure and kind of take yourself back to what it's like to see these fossils in person.
Sweet.
Which is cool. And there's, I would say that always read whatever you can of first person accounts or people who are great writers, because that is how you'll really kind of get to experience places that you may not have the opportunity to go to. That's always a good thing.
If people want to buy the book, we downloaded it on Audible, but I'm assuming you can probably purchase it most places that books are sold.
Yeah, I would say your independent booksellers, or you can go to the Penguin Random House website, and it will direct you to links where you can buy Spying on Whales.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for being here. We appreciate you taking the time out of your day. And thank you again to all our listeners.
Yeah, our secret whale of the week is Pakicetus.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Hard one to find. Hard one to find. At the end
of the episode, you can comment Pakicetus on the social media post about this episode when it goes out. So thanks, awesome. Everyone.
Thank you so much, guys. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you.